Story 1. The Night Janitor Who Wasn't on the Roster. This happened to me in 2017 during the spring semester of my second year working night security at a small liberal arts college in the Midwest. The campus was quiet after 9 p.m. Most students were either in the dorms or gone for the weekend. I worked from 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. in mostly patrolling the 3 older buildings near the edge of the campus green: the library, the language annex, and Old Mariner Hall, which used to be part of a Catholic seminary. That's where it started. Old Mariner was different. The air inside was always dry and cold, no matter the time of year. It smelled like old chalk and carpet cleaner. My shift usually started with a walkthrough: unlock the front vestibule, check the stairwells, note anything left behind by students or staff. Then I'd sit in the hallway by the side door with my notebook and wait until it was time for my next circuit. That night, I was halfway through my second patrol, around 10:30, when I first heard it. A faint jingle. Keys. It came from the upper floor. I paused at the foot of the stairs, listening. The sound repeated. Soft metal clinking, as if someone was swinging a lanyard or adjusting a ring of keys clipped to a belt loop. Normally I wouldn't think twice. Custodial staff had access to the building at night, but this didn't match the janitor's usual routine. Her name was Linda. She was older, always wore heavy boots, and you could hear her coming a mile away. Whoever this was moved differently, lighter, slower. The keys weren't rhythmic. They didn't echo like they should have. It was like the sound drifted in sideways, bouncing off the walls in a way that made it hard to tell where it came from. I climbed the stairs and swept my flashlight across the landing. The hallway was still. The old wooden floors creaked under my boots, but nothing moved. The smell of pine sol lingered, stronger than usual. I called out, "Custodial?" No answer. I walked the whole top floor. 5 classrooms, 2 restrooms, 1 faculty office, all locked. I figured maybe I was just hearing things. Echoes travel weird in that building. I wrote it down in the log anyway, just in case. An hour later, I heard it again. Same sound. Keys. This time from downstairs. I was in the office off the back stairwell when I heard it pass by. Not walk past, just move past. As if the sound itself traveled without footsteps to carry it. No clunk of boots, no breathing, just that steady metal click. I stepped into the hall. Nothing. Just the long corridor lined with fire doors and fluorescent lights. Again, I called out. Louder this time. No response. That's when I noticed something else. There was a distinct pattern to the keys. Not random jingle-jangle, but deliberate. 3 short clinks. A pause, then 2 more, like someone was tapping them against their leg in a loop. 3, pause. 2, 3, pause. 2, it repeated again, then stopped. That rhythm stayed in my head for the rest of the night. A week later, I was finishing my patrol early and decided to stop by the janitor's closet to grab one of the heavy-duty flashlights. The overhead lights had been flickering, and I didn't trust the little mag light on my belt. Linda wasn't around. She usually started her route closer to midnight, but the closet door was open a crack. I knocked. No answer. Inside, the smell hit me first. Not foul, just chemical heavy. Ammonia and something damp. The room was dim. A single yellow bulb buzzed in the ceiling. On the floor was a black contractor bag, the kind maintenance used for broken furniture or bulk trash. But it didn't look right. It wasn't full of cardboard or debris. It sagged oddly in the middle, almost like it had been filled with something soft but heavy. Out of curiosity or stupidity, I crouched down and touched it. It was warm. That stopped me cold. Nothing in that room should have retained heat. I hesitated, then tugged the top open. Inside were folders, stacks of old legal files, yellowed paper, and gloves. The disposable kind, but dirty, smudged reddish-brown at the fingertips. Beneath them was a folded piece of paper, It was a staff contact sheet, the most recent printout. My name was circled, in pen. No one else's name had any markings. I dropped the bag and backed out of the room, closing the door softly. I checked the logbook to see if anyone had signed in. Nothing. I didn't mention it to my supervisor. I didn't even log the flashlight excuse. That night, when I got home, I couldn't stop thinking about the bag, the weight of it, the warmth, and how deliberate it all felt. Fear does something strange to your perception. It turns ordinary things, a janitor's cart, a file cabinet, a hallway mirror, into symbols, totems of something wrong. And when you start looking for meaning in silence, you'll find it. I never went back into that closet again. By the third week, I was starting to lose sleep. Not because of any specific threat, nothing had happened since the bag, but because I couldn't shake the feeling that someone else was walking those halls. Someone I never saw, someone I never heard fully, just felt. It was subtle. One night, I walked into the staff lounge and the TV was on, just static. Another night, a desk lamp on the second floor was lit, even though I'd done final walkthrough 10 minutes earlier. Then came the clipboard. It showed up on the front desk of Old Mariner. I didn't recognize it at first, just a cheap plastic clipboard with a single sheet. It had a chart printed on it, date, time, initials, a sign-in sheet. It looked like one from custodial or maintenance. At the bottom were two sets of initials. LM. Linda's, I assumed. The second one I didn't recognize. JD. I brought it to facilities the next day to confirm. The office manager looked puzzled. "We haven't used physical checklists in years," she said. "And we don't have anyone with those initials." That's when I asked about the janitors. She read off a list of current overnight staff. Linda was the only one assigned to Old Mariner. I told her I'd heard keys. A janitor on a different shift, maybe. She shook her head. "No," she said. "Linda covers it alone." I stopped asking questions after that, but I kept seeing signs, fresh mop water, trash bins that were emptied between rounds. Sometimes a light I knew I'd turned off would be on again the next night. There was no other explanation that made sense, unless someone, something, still believed they worked there. I started reading about night shift psychology. One term came up again and again in late-night forums and research journals. Phantom staff. Silent presences that appear during overnight shifts in institutions with long histories. Hospitals, schools, old municipal buildings. Descriptions varied, but one pattern stood out. They mimicked roles. A nurse seen pushing an empty gurney. A janitor with no face, moving from room to room. They never spoke. They weren't seen directly, but people remembered them. Not vividly, just vaguely enough to doubt it. One night, near the end of the semester, I was sitting at the front vestibule desk, about to do my last sweep. I turned toward the hallway and caught movement in the stairwell window. A reflection. Someone walking down the stairs just past the second-floor landing, wearing what looked like coveralls. I stood up fast and called out, but when I turned the corner, the stairs were empty. I waited until sunrise to leave. That summer, the school did minor renovations in Old Mariner. I switched buildings, then left the job altogether in the fall. I never heard of anything officially reported. But a friend of mine, a freshman who got hired the following year, once mentioned the building. He said the weirdest part wasn't the silence or the layout. It was that sometimes, when you're alone on the second floor, you hear someone locking a door you didn't unlock. And once, he said, he passed someone mopping near the stairwell. A tall man in grey. Looked up to say hi, but the guy turned a corner before he could. When he followed, the hallway was empty. He didn't think much of it, until he asked the janitor about it the next night, and she said no one else was scheduled to clean there. Not in the last 2 years. "I don't know who he saw," she told him, "but whoever it was, he never clocks out." To this day, I don't walk past that building after dark. and I don't listen to the sound of keys unless I know exactly where they're coming from. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. Story 2, the call that wasn't routed through the system. This happened to me in 2018, back when I was working graveyard dispatch at a regional emergency call center in northern Nevada. We didn't get much traffic at night. Most of our calls came in during the day, but a handful of us were still required to be on shift 24/7 to monitor potential system failures, answer emergency overflow, or pick up any stray 911s that hit our county's tower range. There were usually 3 of us: me, another dispatcher, and a supervisor who mostly stayed in the side office reviewing logs and updating internal reports. The main dispatch room was quiet. Each of us had our own station, a 3-monitor setup with software routing, maps, and a live incident feed. Calls would queue in a shared panel, and we'd wear headsets that auto-connected the moment we clicked accept. Everything was recorded. That's important. Everything, even dropped calls, was logged and backed up to a secure drive. It was a Thursday night. Just past 3 a.m., I hadn't had a call in over 40 minutes. The building was silent, lit by overhead fluorescents that buzzed faintly when the HVAC cycled down. I remember because I had just adjusted my headset, slightly itchy on the left ear, when a new call lit up in my queue. No caller ID. That wasn't unusual for emergency lines. I clicked accept. There was a pause. Then a voice came through, a woman's voice. Hello? The tone was wrong. It wasn't panicked, not confused, just detached. As if she wasn't talking to me, or maybe didn't care if anyone was listening. I straightened up and answered. 911 dispatch. Do you have an emergency? Silence. Then, after a few seconds, is this where you answer? I blinked. Ma'am, if you're in danger, I need you to speak clearly. More silence. Then she said my name. Not my full name, not how I introduce myself on calls, just my first name, slowly, carefully. Emily. It wasn't a question, it wasn't urgent. It sounded like someone trying out the syllables of a word they weren't used to saying, the way a person might say the name of a town they'd only seen written. My stomach tightened. I scanned the software. Nothing. No address pinged, no phone number. Just a blank origin with unavailable in all fields. Then the line went dead. I sat still for a few seconds, listening. No dial tone, just the soft click of the system resetting. I flagged the incident and filed a basic report. Dropped call, unknown origin, no return number. But then I checked the audio log. I pulled it up from the internal system, loaded the segment, and hit play. There was nothing. The call existed in the system, timestamped at 3:12 a.m. It showed that I answered and remained on the line for 47 seconds, but the audio file was blank, just ambient room tone. No voice, no dialogue. I replayed it. Same thing. I checked my headset, switched to another station, tried again. Nothing. I didn't tell the supervisor. It felt small, like I'd imagined it. But I started writing things down after that, keeping a notebook instead of just relying on the dispatch software. I didn't trust the system to log everything anymore, not after hearing someone, that didn't make it into the recording. The building we worked in wasn't fancy. It was an old DMV that had been converted into a dispatch office sometime in the early 2000s. The floors were tile, the windows were sealed, and everything echoed faintly, especially at night when the traffic died down. We each had an ergonomic swivel chair, the kind with those heavy wheels and adjustable armrests, the kind that takes effort to move if no one's sitting in it. Mine started shifting position. It began subtly. I'd get up to grab coffee from the break room, come back a few minutes later and find the chair slightly turned. At first, I chalked it up to memory. Maybe I didn't remember how I left it. Maybe I bumped it coming back. But then, I noticed something specific. Each time I came back from the break room, the chair would be turned just a little, always to the right, just slightly off-center. Never enough to seem obvious. Never more than half an inch. But always toward the window. There was nothing outside that window, just a side alley, a brick wall, and an old lamppost that flickered every so often. No foot traffic, no neighboring buildings with line of sight. I ran a little test. One night, I marked the base of the chair legs with tape, thin black strips barely visible, aligned with the tile lines. I left for my 2:45 a.m. break, was gone maybe 4 minutes. When I came back, the front wheels were off the tape, only slightly, maybe 2 centimeters. But it was real. The chair had moved. I started keeping my headset locked in the drawer. I even left a folded sweater over the seat as a way to mark its exact positioning. Each time I returned, something was just off. Not enough to trigger alarm, but enough to make me question my own memory. I mentioned it casually to one of the other dispatchers during shift change. She paused, then said something I hadn't expected. "That room's weird at night, especially if you're alone. You ever feel like someone's still logged in at one of the empty desks?" I didn't answer. She added, "I used to think it was just the HVAC, but sometimes I swear I hear typing." 2 weeks later, during a particularly slow shift, I did something I probably shouldn't have. I started looking up archived reports on failed calls. In our system, these were labeled as NRAs, no response attempted. Most of them were dropped dials or misroutes. Some, though, had weird metadata. One stood out. A flagged incident from 5 years prior. A call routed to our tower from the outskirts of an abandoned mining town just west of the range. The log was short, a 6-second connect. The caller ID read, "Unknown." No callback number, no audio captured. The note simply read, "Voice reported female, whispered phrase, still inside." Line terminated before address confirmed. No follow-up was filed, no units dispatched. It was flagged as a system glitch. I stared at the file for a while. Something about the phrasing got to me. That same week, I came across a dispatch forum, a private, old, barely active, but buried in one thread was a theory I hadn't heard before. They called it the deadline theory. The premise was simple. In certain traumatic echo zones, sites of mass loss, sudden disasters, or unresolved deaths, radio and analog communication systems could sometimes capture residual signals. Not live voices, not ghosts, but data impressions, emotional imprints embedded in the atmosphere. The theory went that during a moment of extreme stress, death, fear, trauma, a final attempt to call for help might lodge in the system. And under the right conditions, those echoes could be replayed. Not contacted, replayed, over and over, not by the person who died, but by the system trying to resolve the error. It was a fringe theory, no citations. But I couldn't shake it, especially because one of the user's examples described something almost identical to what I'd experienced. An anonymous poster wrote, "She called again last night. I heard my name. I didn't give it. I traced the timestamp. It didn't exist in the master log. But the system knew. It routed it anyway." The screen name was a string of random characters, no profile history. Post dated 6 years ago. After reading that, I started leaving the room whenever I took a break. I'd go out to my car and sit in the lot instead of staying in the building. Then came the last call. It came through at 3:18 a.m. No ID, no origin. I almost didn't answer, but I did. The voice was exactly the same. Calm, female, distant. She said one sentence, "You're not the first," and then I hear them too. Click. I replayed the file. Again, silence, no waveform, no audio. Just me sitting there, headset on, breathing shallow. I checked the chair position before I left that morning. It was turned fully toward the window. Nobody ever called that line again, but sometimes I still hear it. Not in the headset, not in recordings, in memory. A voice that wasn't supposed to root through the system, but somehow did. Story 3. the security footage that rewrote itself. This happened to me in the fall of 2019. I was working as a contracted overnight security tech for a mid-sized medical research facility in Oregon. I wasn't a guard. My role was purely surveillance review, mostly post-incident analysis, pulling security footage for HR disputes, break-ins, and occasionally law enforcement when something happened near the perimeter. The building was old. It had been repurposed twice, originally a data center in the 80s, then briefly a satellite office for the State Department of Agriculture before getting bought up by a biotech startup that never quite took off. By the time I was hired, the company only occupied one wing, and the rest of the place sat dark after hours. We had 29 cameras total, all interior, all hardwired into a central review server located in the second-floor control room. They didn't store audio, just time-stamped video backed up every 24 hours. There was no internet access. The system was air-gapped by design. Nothing wireless, nothing remote. That was company policy. The skips started small. The first one I noticed was during a routine review of hallway camera 06B, motion alert at 2:44 a.m. A door opened, lab supply room. I clicked to view the motion window. The footage played normally. Door opens, light flicks on, nothing enters, nothing exits. But then the timeline showed a jump, a black screen, 13 seconds exactly, then it resumed. When the image returned, the light was off. The door closed, and a man was standing in frame, tall, thin, wearing what looked like a long maintenance coat, grey or off-white, and gloves. He stood just barely within the camera's field of view, half his face cropped out. He wasn't moving, not even swaying, just standing perfectly still, angled toward the door. I clicked back to the previous motion flag. Nothing. The frame before the blackout showed the hallway empty, just a view of the corridor and the slightly open supply door. Then, darkness. Then him. I assumed it was a data corruption issue, maybe a camera fault. I logged it as a playback integrity warning and scheduled a systems check. But then I found the same skip 2 nights later. Different camera, same timestamp. 2:44 a.m. Camera 08D this time. Stairwell landing, motion flag, 13-second blackout. Then he was there again. Same coat, same posture. This time he was closer to the camera, close enough that I could see more of his face, but not all of it. His head was tilted slightly away, just enough that the overhead light cast shadow over the side of his face facing the lens. His eyes weren't visible. His hands were down, no expression, but again, not moving. I cross-checked the system logs. No power interruptions, no signal degradation, no scheduled patches or diagnostics, just a 13-second gap. Frame count perfectly aligned on either side of the skip. No acceleration, no compression. The blackout wasn't a glitch, it was deliberate. I started looking through previous weeks. I wrote a basic script to identify gaps in motion-based playback lengths that deviated from the frame rate consistency. It pulled up 6 other gaps, all 13 seconds, all black. In every one, the same thing happened. Nothing. Then, when the footage resumed, he was there. Always still, always just inside the frame, never centered, never reacting to the camera. Just part of the environment, as if the blackout hadn't cut him in, but rather revealed he'd been there all along. By the 3rd week, I started coming in early. Technically, I was night shift, but I'd clock in at 9 p.m. instead of midnight, just so I could double-check camera behavior during live feed windows. I didn't tell my supervisor why. I started walking patrols, something I wasn't required to do. I told the guards I was helping them troubleshoot blind spots. But the truth was, I needed to see if what I was watching was only on screen, or if it had bled into the real building. The corridors were dead quiet after 10. Most rooms were locked, especially the restricted research wings. I didn't carry keys for those, but I didn't need to. The hallways were empty, except for the sounds. It started with footsteps. At first, I thought they were just echo. You can hear your own steps in that place, even with rubber soles. But this was different. The steps didn't align with mine. They preceded me. As I walked, I'd hear steps ahead, around corners, through doors I hadn't opened yet. I tried walking slower. The steps kept pace. I turned and retraced my route, thinking maybe I was chasing my own echo. But the sounds didn't follow. They led, as if someone else knew my route and was walking it backward. One night I decided to test it. I printed out a floor plan and plotted a random path, a series of zigzagging turns and pauses that I decided on right before moving. No predictability, no rhythm. Still, I heard them. At each intersection, just before I reached the corner, I'd hear a creak. One step, then silence. It was subtle but unmistakable. Some sounds don't chase you. They don't sneak behind. They wait ahead, like mirrors placed in time. Once, I passed a vending alcove on the west wing, the kind that's inset in the wall. I paused just beyond it and waited. After 5 seconds, I heard the unmistakable click of a heel on tile behind me. Not a full step, just a shift. I turned fast. Nothing. The alcove was empty, but the small refrigerator light was on, and the vending machine's power light, which had been off earlier that night, was blinking red. I hadn't touched it. There's a phrase I only heard after the fact. Camera loop syndrome. It's not a formal diagnosis, more like a term passed around in low-level security circles. It refers to what happens when you spend too many hours watching empty spaces through surveillance feeds. You begin to project motion. A chair seems to shift. A drawer appears more open. A shadow seems longer than it was. Operators call it perceptual recursion. Your brain, deprived of stimulus, loops patterns onto itself. I thought that's what I was dealing with, until I showed the footage to someone else. It was a Thursday. Our lead compliance officer was reviewing a theft report, and I used the opportunity to casually pull up one of the flagged tapes. I didn't say anything, just let it play. The frame skip, the blackout, then the return. He watched, didn't say a word. When the man appeared in frame, still and silent, he leaned forward and asked, "Who the hell is that?" I didn't answer. I just asked, "You saw him?" He nodded. "Yeah. Is this guy a squatter or something?" I queued up the second video. Different camera, same blackout, same figure. He paled. "That's the same guy," he said. "Same coat." I asked if he noticed anything strange about the way he appeared. He blinked, looked at me, then back at the screen. No entry, just shows up. Jesus. That confirmed it. It wasn't perceptual recursion. It wasn't just me. I tried to report it officially, but the system scrubbed the footage. Literally. When I returned the next night to create backups, the motion flags were gone. The skip durations had changed. Not 13 seconds anymore, just 5. No blackouts, no figure. I checked the raw files on the internal server. They'd been overwritten, not deleted, replaced. The footage had rewritten itself, but only the last 7 days were affected. I still had the previous copies on a local USB. I kept it on me, thinking maybe I'd show someone outside the company, a friend maybe, or upload it anonymously, but the next week I left it on my desk overnight. When I came back, it was gone. No one had access to that room. The drawer was locked. There was no sign of forced entry, but the USB, and only the USB, was missing. That night, I walked every hallway, every stairwell. I carried a flashlight and a second radio. The cameras recorded everything. I made sure of it. I left at 4 a.m. and pulled the tape myself. There were no blackouts, no skips. But when I reached the last file, camera 03A, the East Wing lobby, I saw myself walking, pausing, turning, and behind me, in the far reflection of the glass doors. He was there, just for one frame, just long enough for me to see his coat and his hand. Not waving, just lifted, as if resting on the glass, as if it had been there the whole time, and I had walked into it. The system didn't register any motion, no alerts, but I saved the file. And this time, I didn't keep it in the drawer. I haven't worked in surveillance since, but every so often I walk past glass doors, in parking garages, office lobbies, libraries, and I watch the reflections, not for people behind me, but for the ones who only show up when the feed skips, when the tape rewrites itself, and the black returns.